What if everything you've been taught about logic is a lie? Contradictions don't destroy reality. They create it. Hegel discovered the secret that rulers have been hiding for centuries. Conflict isn't the enemy, it's the fuel of evolution. Every revolution, every breakthrough, every decision you make is born from the collision of opposites. A slave realizes freedom through slavery. Life understands itself through death. Truth crystallizes from lies. These aren't paradoxes, they're the rules of the game. While others fear contradictions, you'll learn to use them. Hegel's Dialectics is a cheat code to reality, an instruction manual to a world where the impossible becomes inevitable. My friend, get comfortable. An exciting journey awaits you ahead. And before it begins, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Part 1. You might have come across the terms thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. It's natural to tie these to Hegel, but it was actually Fichte who introduced them. Hegel wasn't keen on these labels. He thought they imposed stiff structures onto ideas, which didn't sit well with his view where dialectics naturally blossom from the subject at hand. So, if you want to truly grasp Hegel's philosophy, understanding his take on dialectics is crucial. In typical school logic, contradictions are like red flags marking impossible. If something can be both A and not A at the same time, classical logic throws its hands up in confusion. But Hegel flipped this script, arguing that seeing contradictions as dead ends is a major mistake that stops us from really understanding life. In his view, contradictions aren't hurdles to avoid, but power sources that drive thought and reality forward. Hegel's spin on dialectics is about evolving ideas through their contradictions, transforming into stable forms that address previous issues. Imagine a seed. For it to become a plant, it must stop being just a seed. It's not just about disintegration, though. As the plant grows, it retains and surpasses the seed's essence. Hegel even had a term for this, Aufhebung, which translates to sublation and captures a cycle of canceling, preserving, and uplifting. But Hegel didn't just apply this to plants. He saw every idea, every facet of reality as housing its own inner conflict. Take being. It's as basic as it gets, but without specific traits, it becomes indistinguishable from nothingness. Being takes the positive role, nothing the negative, while becoming merges these two, giving rise to a new enriched concept. This clash results in becoming, which entwines both existence and absence in a dynamic process. This isn't just a thought experiment. Hegel believed this pattern mirrored real-life human development. Consider how societies have slowly embraced freedom. In ancient empires, centralized power was the thesis, clashing with personal freedoms and democracy, the antithesis. Out of this conflict, the modern state emerges, aiming for a synthesis balancing authority and individual rights. Total dictatorship or complete chaos can't sustain themselves independently. Addressing these contradictions is how societies grow stronger. Think about technology today. It's been advancing at breakneck speed, challenging our lives for better, but also raising issues like privacy concerns and job displacement. As we work towards a synthesis, it's about leveraging tech to enhance life while tackling these negatives. It isn't about fully accepting or rejecting technology. Growth lies in struggling with these contradictions and finding solutions that maximize the pros while dealing with the cons. Hegel's take on dialectics is groundbreaking because it treats contradictions as opportunities for progress, not obstacles. Since differences progress autonomously, Hegel's philosophy doesn't require random ideas to pop up out of nowhere. Growth arises from what's already present, lending his work a natural logic distinct from arbitrary opinions or mere guesswork. Unlike Plato's unpredictable dialectics, Hegel keeps it grounded, growing from the subject matter's core and trajectory. For Hegel, philosophers shouldn't spin fancy arguments, but should follow concepts to where they lead. This approach is why his philosophy remains a unified system, not a mixed bag of unrelated thoughts. Hegel's philosophy is like a well-oiled machine where each part has a specific role. You can't just pick out one of his ideas and ignore the rest. They all work together, similar to how organs in a body keep you going. It's like when Einstein came along and turned physics on its head by questioning Newton's take on space and time. Things had to be looked at in a new light. The ideas Hegel came up with are all tied together, and they rely on one another. That's why, for him, truth isn't just about lining up ideas with the real world outside. If the world evolves through contradictions and resolving those conflicts, our way of understanding should follow that pattern to get to the heart of truth. For Hegel, truth is about fitting everything into a larger picture, not just stacking up random facts. Reality isn't just a pile of separate things. It's a dynamic, interconnected web where everything is linked with everything else. In Part 2 of Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, called The Journey of Consciousness, we embark on a remarkable voyage. This isn't your typical psychological growth story. It's more of a systematic exploration of how our awareness unfolds, leading us to full self-understanding. Hegel is setting up the foundation for his entire philosophical landscape, showing us the chronological steps needed to truly grasp reality. It's an exceptional work, but well known for being incredibly challenging to fully comprehend. Hegel starts with what he labels sense certainty. This is basically our instinctive feeling when we encounter the world through our senses. We often think that sensory experiences provide solid, indubitable knowledge. You see something and declare, "This here now," believing you've captured the essence of truth. But Hegel flips this notion on its head, showing that this uncomplicated awareness is entangled with broader, universal ideas. Words like here, now, and this seem specific, but are actually general concepts applied across many situations. We come to realize that this seemingly direct understanding we have is rooted in these universal notions. As consciousness strives to hold on to the raw information from our senses, it becomes clear that this direct knowledge isn't so direct after all. The word here becomes an elaborate spatial diagram, now turns into a chronological puzzle, and this morphs into a conceptual grid. Our mind reaches a stage where it can't neatly separate the sensory inputs from the thoughts we apply to understand them. This realization pushes us into the next stage, perception, where we engage directly with what we see, acknowledging its attributes. Yet, perception brings its own issues. We aim to perceive objects as unified wholes with various qualities. But how does one entity embody countless traits without breaking them into pieces? Consider a grain of salt. It's white, cube-shaped, sharp to taste, and soluble. How does one item integrate all these characteristics cohesively? Consciousness swings between assuming that objects hold these traits inherently and believing that its act of perception imparts them. This hopping back and forth reveals that subjective impressions and objective features aren't so distinct after all. The struggles with perception lead consciousness to delve into understanding, seeking the root essence or force beneath what we observe. It dawns that truth isn't found in sensory contact or observed attributes, but in the invisible laws and forces driving reality. Here, it aligns with scientific thinking, explaining what we see through unseen forces like gravity or electromagnetism. But even this has a hang-up. It treats these unseen forces as separate from us, ignoring that consciousness is involved in their interpretation. Then comes a eureka moment: self-consciousness. Here, consciousness realizes it played a role in the entire journey. The knowledge it thought it was uncovering was actually shaped by its own thinking. This insight transforms consciousness into self-consciousness, fully aware of itself as a participant in its quest for understanding. However, self-consciousness quickly encounters another dilemma. If everything it understands is shaped by its own actions, how can it discern real truth from pure invention? It wants certainty about its own existence and character, but can't achieve this alone. Introspection falls short without an external benchmark for validation. This drives self-consciousness to seek interaction with other self-aware beings. This shift from isolated self-awareness to mutual acknowledgement forms the core of one of Hegel's profoundest insights. Genuine self-knowledge obtains its legitimacy from being recognized by others like us. You can't just wake up one day and declare yourself rational, free, or deserving of respect as if it's self-evident. These attributes have to be recognized by other people who can make those same claims about themselves. Having self-awareness doesn't come from solitary introspection either. It results from acknowledging and interacting with others. This need for recognition is why understanding ourselves can't just be an internal process. It requires diving into social and cultural experiences. Our self-awareness expands as we become involved in and share different practices, institutions, and ways of life that shape how we perceive one another. Later in the journey of understanding, we see this growth tackled through different stages, including the ethical life of ancient Greece, the Roman sense of legality, the religious perspectives in medieval Christianity, the Enlightenment's focus on rational thinking, and the reflections of German idealist thought. Each of these eras provides unique insights into how individuals can discover genuine knowledge and a true sense of self. This path reveals that our consciousness and the world are like partners, evolving together in a connected process. We're not simply uncovering pre-existing objects, but are actively shaping what becomes real and objective. Likewise, objects aren't independently out there. They're always experienced through our consciousness and shaped by the way we think about and see them. This insight challenges the old philosophical idea that understanding is just about a person interacting with an object. Hegel argues instead that the lines between subjective experiences and objective reality are blurred and are part of a bigger whole he calls absolute knowledge. Part 3. The most discussed section of Hegel's phenomenology is the intense encounter between two self-aware beings meeting as if in the wild. This dramatic narrative has fueled revolutions, provided insights into psychoanalysis, and been a hot topic in post-colonial discussions. But its core significance goes beyond political interpretation. The story of the master and slave reveals the fundamental need for mutual recognition in genuine human relationships. It illustrates that freedom and self-awareness aren't solo achievements. They require a continuous interaction with others who are equally free and self-aware. Picture two self-conscious individuals suddenly confronting each other in the wilderness, each rock solid in their belief that they rule their world. Both were convinced their desires and choices were the ultimate truth until their encounter. Now, each faces another asserting the same claim, leading to an immediate conflict since both can't be the ultimate authority. One must either concede or compel the other to acknowledge their dominance. This ignites a life-or-death struggle where each risks it all, valuing recognition over mere survival. However, if one perishes, the opportunity for recognition vanishes. A deceased opponent cannot admit defeat. So, the contest has to cease before any fatalities, prompting one to choose submission over death. This dynamic creates the master-slave relationship, with one assuming the role of the master and the other becoming the slave. The master proves that freedom outweighs life itself, while the slave demonstrates that living surpasses freedom in importance. Yet, this triumph by the master is unsatisfactory, as it undermines the recognition he sought. Genuine recognition stems from someone who can willingly offer or deny it. When the slave is coerced into acknowledging the master's superiority, it lacks true validation. The master ends up with superficial recognition lacking substance. Additionally, the master grows increasingly dependent on the slave for material needs, forfeiting the independence that initially defined mastery. It's as if the master becomes entangled in his own victory. At a glance, the slave's position looks grim, but there are hidden advantages that can completely change the game. Firstly, the slave retains the fear of death, grounding them in a fundamental human experience. The master, having conquered the fear of death, loses touch with this essential aspect. Secondly, the slave engages in work to satisfy the master's demands, acquiring skills, knowledge, and discipline to manage desires. By interacting with the stubborn material world, the slave learns to reshape nature for human purposes, gaining practical skill and self-discipline through labor. More importantly, the slave begins to see themselves reflected in the products of their labor. What they create contains the imprints of their intelligence, capabilities, and deliberate actions. This kind of self-recognition doesn't rely on the master's approval. The slave comes to realize they have literally molded the environment, transforming raw nature into a humanized space. This self-knowledge through work grants the slave a richer self-awareness compared to the master's hollow authority. The situation flips entirely when the slave recognizes that the master's power is entirely dependent on the slave's continuous willingness to work and acquiesce. The master is lacking in skills, useful knowledge, and any direct connection to the material aspects of life. As the slave grows more skilled and self-aware, the master's grip starts to loosen. True mastery isn't about bossing others around. It's about mastering yourself by leading a disciplined life. And that's not all Hegel has to say. He takes this idea and turns it on its head. The whole master-slave relationship is shaky because neither one gets the acknowledgement they really crave. The master only gets empty praise from someone he looks down on, while the slave becomes more self-aware and starts chafing under control. Eventually, both sides realize that true freedom comes from respecting each other and moving past this master-slave dynamic to create better social and political systems. This master-slave idea teaches us a lot about being human. First off, things like self-awareness and freedom aren't just handed to you at birth. You have to fight for them and keep working at them. Secondly, you can't just demand real acknowledgement. It's something that others need to give willingly and honestly. Third, genuine independence is understanding that we all need each other and engaging with others, and the world isn't just about pushing our own agendas. Finally, work and discipline aren't just how we make money. They're crucial for growing our freedom and sense of self. These lessons still shape political theories, psychology, and how we critique society to this day. Part 4. All right, so picture Hegel standing atop a big philosophical mountain, waving around this idea he calls the absolute. Now, it's not like some mystical force floating around in space. Nah, it's more the concept that every single thing, your thoughts, the stuff you see, people you meet, all the tiny details, and even the vast universe are really just pieces of one huge interconnected puzzle. This is reality in its purest essence, especially when we peel back our usual narrow views to see how everything really ties together. To grasp what Hegel's talking about with the absolute, you gotta look at his philosophy like a machine with all the parts working in harmony. You can't just stroll up to the absolute and say hello. We humans, with our limited brains, catch glimpses of reality in fragments, like subjective versus objective, or thoughts versus physical stuff. And we often fail to see how they all fit into a larger whole. We easily get fooled into thinking these differences are permanent and end up viewing the world as a bunch of separate boxes. But to reach the absolute, you need to go through a process that shows how every point contradicts itself and makes sense only when it's part of something grander. Hegel kicks off his grand scheme with an ultra-simple idea, pure being, which doesn't have any specific traits. It feels like a solid start because there's nothing there to argue about. But here's the trick. Pure being is as blank as pure nothing, since they both lack content. This little conundrum leads us to the idea of becoming, where being and nothingness kind of meld together in a never-ending dance. From this starting point, Hegel's brain goes to work, digging deeper and deeper into more complex notions just by thinking hard. Each concept has its own little contradictions, nudging us forward to a newer, better version. His masterpiece, The Science of Logic, maps out this journey over three main phases. First up, there's the logic of being, checking out basic ideas that seem stand-alone, like quality and quantity. Then there's the logic of essence, exploring how these ideas lean on one another, with concepts like cause and effect popping up. Lastly, the logic of the concept shows these connections as threads of thought itself, weaving the core reality of everything. But just noodling with these ideas won't capture the full picture of the absolute. At some point, these pure thoughts have to roll up their sleeves and step out into the real world. That's where nature jumps in, reflecting these logical ideas in the vastness of space, the tick-tock of time, and the stuff we can touch. The philosophy of nature follows as things get more complex, from simple elements to richer forms like chemicals and living beings, each step layering on more order and self-awareness. In nature's realm, we hit the height, with living things fine-tuned to survive and thrive. But even the brainiest animals are stuck in their daily grind of needs and instincts. The big shift happens when life gets a brainy leap and starts understanding itself. That's where spirit and human consciousness come strolling in, bringing along thoughts, culture, and a taste for freedom. Spirit is like that grand idea coming back to itself, enriched by its worldly journey, but now aware it's the backbone of everything. In the philosophy of spirit, we get to see consciousness sprout from its smallest seeds to its fullest bloom. Subjective spirit dives into how folks develop their sense of self, beginning with the raw sensation and growing through self-awareness to thinking in theory and practice. Objective spirit, in contrast, explores how societal and political setups help people recognize each other and reach mutual freedom. At the top of the mountain, you've got absolute spirit delving into the deepest human insight through art, religion, and philosophy. Each level is a fuller form of self-awareness, a clearer understanding of the absolute. In Hegel's worldview, you only truly get each part when you see it within his entire framework. Logic, nature, and spirit aren't separate worlds, but facets of one ever-evolving reality. Logical principles pave the way for natural and spiritual journeys. Nature serves as a platform for logical ideas to show themselves, while through spirit, the absolute becomes conscious, realizing itself as both logical and part of nature. This setup is like a circle where everything connects and depends on everything else. That's why Hegel's idea of the absolute isn't just a final goal, but a continuous path of growing and understanding oneself. The absolute isn't just the thing itself, it's also the action, not just the end, but the journey. It's not about finishing by reaching a final goal, but about realizing it's always capable of transforming and renewing itself. The absolute is an endless journey of exploring, expressing itself, and then reflecting on those experiences. This makes Hegel's system lively and constantly evolving, rather than just a tidy arrangement. Part 5. Hegel's Science of Logic is basically a massive philosophical project that dives into the nitty-gritty of how we think and understand the world, using a natural progression of ideas. This isn't just some random philosophical ramble. Hegel argues there's a necessary system driving our thoughts, aiming to evolve our understanding to truly grasp reality. It's a key part of his entire philosophical gig and is known for being quite the brain bender, with lots of folks arguing over it. Hegel kicks things off with what he considers the most basic idea: pure being. Why start there? Well, because it seems like a neutral, bias-free point for launching into deeper thought. If you're after a systematic understanding, you want to start with something that doesn't come with baggage. just being in its barest form. But here's the twist. This super broad idea of pure being ends up being no different from pure nothingness. Strip away all the specifics, and you're left with zilch. So right out of the gate, we hit a paradox. Being and nothingness are like two peas in a pod, endlessly flipping because neither has any distinct qualities. This back and forth between being and nothingness brings us to the idea of becoming. Think of it as a transition where being morphs into nothing and vice versa. It's not just aimless change. It's like a cycle of life and death, where stuff springs into existence, then fades away. Becoming takes the stage as the first sturdy concept, richer than just being or nothing on their own, as it encapsulates both. But becoming doesn't settle. It's like a spark, leading to more developments. Eventually, it gives rise to a more defined state, a specific existence emerging from this flux. Enter determinate being or existence, which is more solid and tangible than the abstract notion of being. But here's the hurdle. Determinate being comes with its own issues, as being specific implies limitations. It means not being something else. So being defined automatically introduces negation or opposition into the mix. From there, the logic journey whisks us through more intricate concepts like quality, quantity, and measure. Each evolves from grappling with the complications of the one before. Quality is about what fundamentally defines something. However, these qualities can shift without altering what the thing is, which leads us to quantity, where differences are about having more or less of something. Quantitative thinking seems rock solid. Numbers don't fudge, after all. But without qualities, numbers are just empty. Similarly, without quantities, qualities lose direction. Measure comes in to connect the dots, where numbers take on meaning through quality. As we shift from focusing on being to essence, the narrative moves from seeing things as standalone to seeing them as parts of a web of relationships. Essence emphasizes these connections, where everything is defined by how it relates to everything else. It delves into things like identity and difference, cause and effect, substance and accident, each peeling back layers to show that seemingly independent things are really all interconnected. Essence is like a mirror reflecting itself, a being that now defines itself through its connections. Within the logic of essence, we learn that all these connections mirror how our minds operate. Stuff like cause and effect, substance and accident, identity and difference. They're not just frameworks out there waiting for us to find. Rather, they're ways our thought process maps out reality. Realizing this leads us to the logic of concepts, the final phase, where thought recognizes it's the mastermind behind all these ideas it's been wrestling with. This area of logic isn't about how our thoughts connect to the world outside us. It's about how they connect within themselves. It digs into ideas like universality, particularity, and individuality, showing the inner workings of concepts. A universal idea shapes itself through particular examples and comes to life in real-world instances. But saying an individual is just a simple example of a universal rule doesn't hit the mark. When we truly understand a concept, each individual case both embodies and illustrates the universal, while the universal communicates through these particular cases. This interaction is what Hegel calls the self-determining concept, where thought creates its own content through its own actions. Hegel wraps it up with a concept he calls the absolute idea. This isn't just one big idea that encompasses all others, but is instead the full system of conceptual evolution, showing how thought comes to realize itself by setting up all the necessary structures for complete understanding. Reaching this pinnacle of logic isn't just an end. It's also a new beginning, because this absolute idea needs to express itself to become real. This marks a transition from pure logic into nature, where these logical ideas emerge in forms like space, time, and matter. In this way, logic becomes the foundation for understanding both the workings of the natural world and the development of the spirit. Part 6. Let's break down Hegel's take on nature without getting too tangled up in complicated philosophical lingo. Hegel's approach to nature is his way of trying to understand everything around us. But he doesn't think of nature as completely detached from our thoughts. Instead, he sees it as the idea brought to life in space, time, and matter. This doesn't mean Hegel's saying nature is just made up in our heads or that physical things don't exist. What he's getting at is that there are logical patterns in the natural world that we can grasp if we take a closer look at the deeper concepts behind them. For him, nature is like a real-world version of our logical ideas. When these ideas pop up in nature, it's a whole different story compared to when they're just abstract thoughts. Logical thinking develops in a neat, orderly way because it has to. But nature, it's full of randomness and outside influences that add complexity, which Hegel calls nature's weakness. Unlike logical thoughts, which unfold perfectly, natural things depend on all sorts of unpredictable factors. Even though nature might seem a bit chaotic, it's not just random. Hegel lays it all out, showing how things move from the simplest natural forms to more complex ones that almost start to think for themselves. It's a bit like what happens in logic, going from basic being to understanding connections and then reaching a kind of self-awareness. In nature, this isn't just a mental exercise. It's actually about how different forms emerge and evolve over time. Each new form gets better at being independent and relying less on outside stuff. Hegel's philosophy of nature is divided into 3 big chunks. The first one covers mechanics, things like space, time, matter, and motion. This is where we see the most basic ways logic shows up, with everything just happening because of external forces. Space and time provide the backdrop, but they don't get interesting until matter enters the scene. Matter keeps things going by existing in space and lasting through time, and movement is the first hint of something acting on its own, although still influenced by outside forces. Then we've got physics, which digs into things with a bit more going on inside. It's about processes like magnetism, electricity, and chemical reactions, where things hold themselves together by being different, yet connected. Take a magnet. It's not just a lump of material. It interacts with other magnets in a kind of back and forth. And when it comes to chemistry, elements show even more independence by playing specific roles in different substances and reactions. They act in ways that seem logical, with their universal traits guiding what they do. The final and most advanced section of the philosophy of nature focuses on organic life. Here, natural creatures hit the peak of individuality and self-determination. Living things don't just react to their environment, they engage with it actively. A plant or animal isn't just a fancy arrangement of molecules. It's a self-sustaining entity that maintains its identity through constant growth and change. This form of organic individuality is the ultimate example of self-reliance in nature, balancing its own needs with external interactions. However, even the most advanced life forms are limited by what nature allows. They can sustain themselves and reproduce, but they're caught in cycles of meeting immediate needs and repeating biological patterns. They respond to their surroundings, but can't change them based on logical goals. They can reproduce, but don't create entirely new ways of living. Most importantly, they don't have the ability to be aware of themselves or acknowledge their own creations. These limits suggest something beyond nature, leading us to the realm of spirit, where the idea comes full circle as self-aware freedom. Hegel discusses how life naturally leads us to consider death as the unavoidable end for all living things. To him, death isn't just the stopping of biological processes. It's a natural boundary that highlights both what natural individuality can achieve and where it falls short. Living creatures can find unity and focus within themselves, but this can't last forever under nature's conditions. Death underscores that individuals, limited by their very nature, point to a kind of selfhood that can go beyond these limitations. This awareness sets the stage for transitioning from a nature-focused philosophy to one centered on spirit, where ideas gain self-awareness and true infinity is realized through human freedom and cultural development. In Hegel's framework, the philosophy of nature is crucial. Firstly, it shows how logical ideas can manifest in the real world without losing their logical truths. Secondly, it reveals that natural processes follow patterns that we can comprehend, even when they appear random and influenced by external forces. Thirdly, it lays the foundation for understanding humans as part of nature, yet capable of transcending natural boundaries using reason and freedom. Finally, it clarifies why spirit is not merely a part of nature, despite its roots in natural development. So, the philosophy of nature serves as a link between abstract logical thinking and concrete spiritual existence. Part 7. The final piece of Hegel's philosophical puzzle zeroes in on the human spirit. Here, the grand concept circles back to itself, evolving into self-aware freedom and achieving a deep self-understanding through the evolution of human culture. This spirit isn't about ghosts or anything supernatural. It's all about human consciousness, society, and culture, seen as the pinnacle of rational reality. In this perspective, the logical building blocks that once seemed external become aware of themselves and can freely choose their own paths. Humans, though natural beings, transcend their limits by recognizing their thinkers, decision-makers, and creators. This journey of self-awareness in the philosophy of spirit begins from the most basic levels, reaching its peak in art, religion, and philosophy. The development of spirit follows a familiar pattern in Hegel's work. progressing from simple existence through external relationships to a never-ending self-referential state. The notion of subjective spirit delves into individual consciousness, showing how it matures internally from basic feelings to practical and theoretical reasoning. Meanwhile, the idea of objective spirit highlights the social and political systems where individuals gain mutual recognition and group freedom. Absolute spirit looks at those top-notch cultural achievements where humans truly understand themselves and their place in the grand scheme of reality. Each level is a fuller realization of human autonomy and self-direction. Starting with subjective spirit, it begins at the base level of consciousness, almost like a soul naturally linked to its body and environment, much like animals. Yet, within the human soul is a spark, a potential for self-awareness. This spark ignites as the soul sets out on a journey of differentiation, starting to see itself. True consciousness arises when the soul can distinguish itself from the objects around it. Though initially, this is more about external relationships than true self-awareness. Consciousness goes through stages outlined in the phenomenology of spirit, from sensory certainty to perception, understanding, and eventually, self-awareness. But the philosophy of spirit offers a more systematic look at consciousness, focusing on its logical structure rather than just its development. Consciousness steps into theoretical reason when it recognizes its conceptual contribution to the objects it perceives, understanding that objectivity is largely constructed by subjective thought. Practical reason kicks in when consciousness understands its capacity to alter reality to meet rational goals, shaping the world to fit its intentions. However, the subjective spirit isn't entirely complete if it remains isolated from other conscious beings. An individual can excel in theory and practice, but can't truly claim rationality and freedom without being acknowledged by other rational and free individuals. This drives the subjective spirit toward objective spirit, where they establish shared institutions embodying their collective pursuit for rational freedom. Objective spirit isn't just the sum of individual minds. It's a social reality that thrives on individual participation but surpasses any single person. It unfolds in three main phases, each providing a more suitable form of mutual recognition and collective freedom. Initially, abstract right lays down the basics of social life, a legal framework enabling individuals to interact without infringing on each other's freedoms. Rights like ownership, contracts, and criminal laws form the base for society, but act as external boundaries instead of true ethical involvement. Morality seeks to ground these social bonds in personal moral conviction, rather than relying on external legal constraints. Just sticking to personal morality doesn't really work because it doesn't have a solid base to support people working together in a society. Because of these issues, we aim for what's called ethical life, where personal beliefs and the social structures around us come together nicely. This ethical life unfolds through three main institutions that pave the way for people to truly flourish. First off, there's the family, which is where immediate ethical bonds based on love and natural feelings thrive. It's within families that individuals get recognized and supported without needing to constantly focus on morals or rely on laws. However, Family ties are really just about specific relationships and fall short of providing the universal support needed for more complex social structures. That's when civil society takes over, as individuals pursue their own interests through business activities and community groups. This area provides freedom and diversity, but it doesn't come without a fair share of conflicts and inequalities that people can't resolve through private dealings alone. The state is where everything gels together, balancing personal interests with universal rationality. Hegel saw the state not just as a law enforcer or protector of personal rights, but as the living embodiment of a community's commitment to rational freedom. In this system, individuals find personal fulfillment and global acknowledgement by taking part in activities that mirror their shared rational character. The state isn't only about government functions, it includes all the ways a community organizes its shared life. Things like education, professions, culture, and religion. These provide the foundation for individuals to develop their talents and truly discover themselves by contributing to the well-being of society. Yet, even the most well-designed state is restricted by its specific historical roots and can't completely explain human self-awareness. This limitation pushes us toward something beyond the objective spirit, pointing to the absolute spirit, where people go beyond all boundaries and achieve total self-realization through activities like art, religion, and philosophy. In the realm of the absolute spirit, it's more about spirit reflecting on itself, rather than engaging with the outside world or finite social constructs. This is where humanity understands its true nature and its place within the vast context of reality. Part 8. In his work, Elements of the Philosophy of Right, he presents a compelling argument that the state represents the peak of human freedom and rational decision-making. Instead of viewing the state like some necessary evil that cramps individual freedom as some liberal views might suggest, Hegel turns the tables. To him, actual freedom isn't about doing whatever tickles your fancy, it's about participating in rational political structures. The state, therefore, isn't just some outside force restricting us. It's actually the bedrock that makes true freedom possible. To get a handle on this bold idea from Hegel, we have to dig into his understanding of freedom and why he believes it hinges on political structures instead of just acting on every whim. Starting with his political theory, Hegel tosses aside the common notion that freedom is about simply not having anyone telling you what to do. This negative freedom, the idea that being unbothered means being free, is, in Hegel's eyes, more like being a slave to random desires and circumstances. If you're just going along with whatever noise your impulses make, you're not really free. You're shackled by stuff you didn't choose. True freedom, he insists, comes from following rational guidelines, not just knee-jerk instincts. This positive freedom is about staying disciplined, making choices based on reasoning instead of impulses, and looking beyond just short-term goals. But getting to this rational self-rule isn't something you can pull off all by yourself. Hegel's philosophy of right spells out how freedom develops in three main stages, each offering a richer form of self-governance. First up is the abstract right, laying down ground rules by acknowledging people as individuals who can own property and make deals. Rights around ownership give folks control, helping them hit their targets. Contracts allow people to collaborate willingly while maintaining their autonomy. However, this abstract right can be pretty cut and dry. It sets the scene for freedom, but doesn't ensure people will actually use those rights to genuinely self-direct. While it can shield freedom, it can't generate it. Next is morality, an attempt to root freedom in personal moral codes rather than just external laws. It posits that true freedom springs from duty, not desire, from universal principles, not personal whims. Kant's categorical imperative is an example urging folks to act according to principles they'd want everyone to live by. But Hegel thinks moral principles by themselves are too general to guide real-world actions effectively. The categorical imperative keeps you from contradictions, but it doesn't lay out what targets to aim for or how society should be shaped. Plus, since personal moral perspectives can be subjective, there's no promise that everyone's ethical inclinations will converge. Due to these challenges, freedom's evolution leaps beyond mere rights and individual morality into the realm of ethical life. Here, rational principles are grounded in the tangible social domain. Ethical life marries personal morality with actual social conditions, offering freedom through shared customs and community roles. Unlike abstract rights, ethical life gives freedom substance, delineating the roles and duties where people find satisfaction. It also surpasses personal morality by offering a solid groundwork for principles through established social institutions. Hegel regards ethical life as growing through three core institutions, each paving comprehensive paths for human development. The family is the starting point, showcasing an immediate ethical tie rooted in love, trust, and care. Family bonds go beyond plain biological or legal ties, their moral connections fostering genuine communities where folks recognize their interdependence. Within families, parents, children, husbands, and wives achieve fulfillment by investing in the family unit, rather than just aiming for personal goals. Still, family bonds are inherently narrow and can't furnish the broader framework necessary for the knitted web of our modern social lives. While families set the stage for ethical development, they can't accommodate all the connections and activities individuals engage in to find true self-fulfillment in today's world. When people move beyond their immediate family circle, that's when civil society starts to take shape. It's in this space where folks chase after their own goals, whether through businesses, joining professional circles, or getting involved in volunteer work. This environment is ripe with chances for individuals to grow and for society to come together, as people with different talents and interests find ways to collaborate in complex networks of exchange. But civil society also brings its own set of issues. Conflicts can arise, and inequality can rear its ugly head, threatening the moral backbone of society. The competition that's inherent in market dynamics can deepen divides and potentially lead to social breakdown, while a focus on personal gain might weaken people's commitment to the common good. To prevent civil society from unraveling its own foundations, it's essential to have rules and moral guidance from beyond the economic sphere. The state is seen as the ultimate expression of ethical living, where individual desires and universal principles align smoothly via well-designed political systems. Hegel's take on the state goes beyond merely enforcing laws or protecting personal rights. It's about a community's dedication to rational freedom. An ideal state enables people to find personal fulfillment and gain universal recognition by participating in systems that emphasize shared rationality. The state includes constitutional structures that promote political engagement, educational systems that develop rational thought, economic policies that strive for the collective good, and cultural pathways that support ethical development. By becoming part of these systems, citizens discover freedom not despite their political responsibilities, but through them. For them, political participation serves as a means of self-realization, rather than just being a duty or sacrifice. Part 9. The Trickiness of Reason. Hegel tackles history with the aim of finding a logical order in what seems at first to be a chaotic mess. Rather than seeing history as either a series of chance events or an unfathomable divine blueprint, Hegel argues there's a rational pattern that we can understand through philosophical reflection. He contends that history is really about the unfolding of human freedom, as people gradually create more rational social and political structures. This isn't because people sit down and design them on purpose. Instead, Hegel talks about something he calls the cunning of reason, where rational outcomes unexpectedly emerge from the chaos of individuals pursuing their own agendas and desires. What really fuels historical change is this deep-seated human craving for recognition. We want others to acknowledge our freedom and dignity, especially if those others are also free and ready to respond to that need for recognition. This desire inevitably leads to conflicts, since groups often disagree about what should be recognized and in what manner. Such clashes stir things up, pushing societies to come up with new systems and practices to address the problems of their predecessors. Hegel visualizes historical progress as a dialectical process, where contradictions give rise to new syntheses, which preserve the good aspects while addressing the shortcomings of the old systems. Hegel divides world history into 4 main stages that chart the growth of human freedom and self-awareness. In the first stage, the Oriental world, it's like humanity's early days. Here, only the ruler enjoys genuine freedom, while everyone else remains in servitude. Though Oriental societies achieve political unity and cultural progression, they fall short on individual liberty, which Hegel sees as essential for authentic human advancement. Next comes the Persian Empire, which starts breaking free from this limitation by mixing different cultures, even if it still relies on an authoritarian structure. Then we have the Greek world, which represents humanity's teenage years. This is when individual freedom starts to blossom, but it's limited to select communities and doesn't become universally accepted. Greek city-states open up new possibilities for political participation and cultural flourishing, but at the same time, they shut many people out of citizenship and rely on slavery for economic support. Their freedom concept, while inspiring, lacks the universal values necessary for an inclusive society. The Greek effort to blend personal and community interests eventually collapses under more diverse and intricate political realities. The Roman era follows, symbolizing humanity's adulthood. Here, the legal and political frameworks stretch far and wide, recognizing every free individual as a legal entity, irrespective of their culture. But this universality mainly exists on paper, offering equal rights without real freedom or community sense. The Roman Empire, assembled through military power and efficient governance, struggles to create the ethical bonds that make political engagement personally fulfilling instead of just a duty. Finally, we reach the Germanic world, reflecting humanity at its mature phase. This stage emphasizes the concept of infinite subjectivity that Christianity introduces, which is realized politically through constitutional monarchy and modern moral principles. Christianity reinterprets how humans perceive themselves, valuing every soul alike and bridging the divine with human limitations. Translating these spiritual insights into political realities took many centuries. Significant milestones on this journey include the Protestant Reformation, the Enlightenment, and the French Revolution, each contributing significantly to advancing universal human freedom and dignity. The French Revolution is a classic illustration of both the upsides and downsides when it comes to the Germanic perspective on freedom. On the bright side, the revolution effectively dismantled the old system's unfair benefits and outdated institutions, laying down a new principle that political power should be built on rational agreement instead of just sticking to age-old traditions. However, there was a downside too. It shed light on the dangers of implementing broad, universal ideas without grounding them in real institutions and ethical relationships. The period of terror highlights the chaos that can erupt when revolutionary enthusiasm tries to enforce ideal freedom by instantly applying logical principles without taking into account existing social relationships and cultural norms. Hegel sees the constitutional monarchy of his time as a middle ground, maintaining the revolution's commitment to universal freedom, but avoiding the overly abstract nature of radical democracy. This form of monarchy combines public involvement with stable institutions, safeguarding individual rights while fostering social cohesion, merging rational ideas with historical customs. The monarch serves as the symbolic head of state, while elected representatives provide democratic legitimacy, and professional bureaucrats ensure effective governance. This arrangement allows people to participate in rational political life without having to sever their personal connections and cultural roots. Nevertheless, Hegel's vision of history extends beyond just political development. It also encompasses the full array of cultural achievements. He believes that art, religion, science, and philosophy each have historical trajectories that show logical progress. Each cultural domain hits its peak at particular historical moments that offer the right conditions for its flourishing. For example, Greek art, the Christian religion, and German philosophy stand as the top achievements within their cultural areas. This doesn't mean later periods are inferior. Rather, it acknowledges that different cultural expressions reach their zenith under different historical scenarios. The task of philosophy, then, is to understand how each era contributes to humanity's path towards self-awareness and freedom. Part 10. At the heart of Hegel's philosophy, you've got this concept called absolute spirit. This is where people really get to know themselves through super cool stuff like art, religion, and philosophy. These are the main ways we try to understand ourselves and figure out how we relate to this gigantic universe. Unlike the limits we find in our own minds or in societies, absolute spirit is totally free and knows itself in an infinite way. Each of its forms provides a different route to self-discovery, all in an effort to weave together thoughts and reality, the finite and infinite, human and divine. Art steps up as the most straightforward way for absolute spirit to express itself, presenting truth as beauty. In genuine art, universal ideas use earthly materials to create works that are meaningful, not just plain reproductions. Great art doesn't just reflect abstract ideas. It brings the spiritual to life for those who engage with it. When we encounter genuine artistic beauty, there's a powerful connection between universal and personal, infinite and finite. Art gives us the first glimpse of absolute truth, though it's still attached to using physical forms instead of pure concepts. Hegel describes how art evolves through three main stages, each showing different ways spiritual essence meets its physical form. First is symbolic art, like pyramids and ancient sculptures, which whispers mysteries and power, but can't fully express their spiritual punch through their forms. Then we have classical art. Think of Greek sculptures, where spiritual essence blends smoothly with the artworks, like those iconic statues of gods and heroes. But even in their perfection, these forms confine the spirit by being tied to physical shapes. Romantic art breaks these chains, realizing that spiritual essence can't be confined to finite forms. Christian art, medieval buildings, and modern poetry capture the spirit's rich inner life, showing that external forms have limits. Though romantic art loses the physical perfection of classical art, it dives deeper into spiritual discovery. As it evolves, romantic art starts leaning towards religious and philosophical understanding, signaling not an end to art, but its evolution into higher spiritual expressions. Then we have religion, the second expression of absolute spirit. Here, absolute truth pops up through stories and emotions, beyond just what's physically beautiful. Religious thought intertwines the finite and infinite with stories, symbols, and rituals, aiming to touch people more deeply than just visually. Religion digs deeper than art by openly engaging with the infinite nature of ultimate reality. But it's still not the final answer, since it depends on stories and symbols rather than clear logic. Religious truth comes out in tales of divine actions instead of structured concepts. Hegel outlines religion's journey through stages like art, improving its take on infinite reality. There's nature-based religion, like pantheism and animism, seeing divinity in nature but blurring the finite and infinite lines. Then come religions centered on spiritual figures, like Judaism or Greek polytheism, which recognize divine transcendence but keep a solid gap between the human and divine. Christianity stands out because it teaches that God becomes human through the concept of incarnation. This idea sets Christianity apart, suggesting it reaches a high level of spiritual insight by showing how the boundless spirit expresses itself through our human lives. By becoming human, God opens the door for people to discover their divine potential, not by changing their outer appearance, but by waking up to their inner spiritual nature. The story of Christ's death and resurrection illustrates how the limits of human life connect with the infinite, revealing that eternal life is about moving beyond the confines of this world. The Holy Spirit represents this infinite spirit present in the community of believers, highlighting their link to the divine. However, Christianity's deep insights still rely on stories and teachings that stir belief, rather than being purely understood through logic. Unlike straightforward philosophy, which spells things out clearly, these religious symbols hint at truths indirectly. This limitation hints that philosophy might express truth more completely than religion, as it tackles the same truths with clear concepts instead of relying on imagery or tales. According to Hegel's philosophy, this clarity stands at the summit of understanding, presenting truth transparently by using pure thought, rather than seeking proof through the senses or outside sources. Philosophical thinking is infinite because it sees itself as the source of its concepts and ideas. Philosophers don't stumble upon truth out in the world. They understand that rational thought is the core reality that underlies everything. This realization brings Hegel's philosophy full circle, revealing that the system's foundational ideas mirror the true structure of reality. By engaging in philosophy, absolute knowledge is achieved where thought perceives itself as both its subject and end goal. Section 11. The drama of recognition. So, Hegel put this concept of recognition right at the heart of how he sees human nature and our society. But it's not just about wanting a pat on the back from others. It's way more about truly understanding ourselves and finding freedom. You can't just sit alone and figure out who you are. You need other people to see you and acknowledge you for you to truly understand yourself. Without that, it's hard to really be self-aware or make progress as a society. Recognition is the backbone that holds up everything, from who we are to how our societies and cultures function. This whole need for recognition kicks off because humans are super aware of themselves. Unlike animals who just sense what's around them, we know we're thinking beings. But here's the hitch. You can't really confirm who you are by yourself. Like, I can say I'm smart or dignified, but it doesn't mean much unless other thinking people agree with me. So, this self-awareness nudges us to seek recognition from others. Still, recognition isn't something you can just demand or manipulate out of people. It must be given freely by those who have the choice not to. True recognition has to come from folks who are rational and free, not from those who are pressured or lack sound judgment. This sets up a bit of a pickle. We need people's acknowledgement to confirm our freedom, but that counts only if they are free too. So, the challenge becomes figuring out how to make mutual recognition possible. Hegel paints a picture of a misguided attempt to solve this with a master-slave dynamic. Each side tries to prove they're better, risking everything to get recognized. When one becomes the master, he gets forced flattery from the slave's concession, which isn't true validation. This victory rings hollow, as real affirmation is missing, and the slave's acknowledgement is meaningless, because it's not freely given. This failure to find recognition through domination pushes us to explore alternatives based on mutual respect and exchange. One route is Stoicism, which focuses on gaining self-respect through introspection and personal conviction instead of from others. It embraces a sense of freedom by accepting life as it is, yet it stays quite abstract, stressing inner dignity rather than changing the outside world. It can keep you strong, but it doesn't necessarily pave the way for genuine human progress. Skepticism goes even further, challenging everything in the outside world and leading to this radical independence, tossing aside all beliefs that could be questioned. Yet, this approach doesn't offer anything concrete to hold on to. A skeptical outlook might protect you from mistakes by dodging commitment to any belief, but it leaves you empty and cut off from reality. This ends up creating what Hegel calls the unhappy consciousness, where you're wanting certainty but can't find any firm footing. This unhappy consciousness is a significant moment in self-understanding. It underlines how looking only to yourself for recognition falls short and shows the need for a more communal way to truly grasp the essence of recognition. Imagine this, having this feeling of unhappy consciousness, where you're torn between the everyday hustle and you're longing for something bigger and unchanging, like the absolute truth. It's like reaching out for something always just outside your grasp, a bit like how medieval Christianity described the divide between earthly life and the heavenly realm. This division creates endless yearning and habitual self-denial as you attempt to break away from life's limits through strict self-discipline and profound mystical experiences. So, here's the kicker. At some point, the unhappy consciousness starts to realize that hunting for that infinite sense of validation isn't all about going it alone on spiritual adventures. No, the infinite isn't stashed away in some unreachable spot. It's actually much closer, right in our connections with others and what we collectively pull off culturally. This light bulb moment pushes you away from solitary spiritual journeys and into engaging with shared practices and institutions where mankind's group achievements truly shine. When this shift happens, real recognition isn't about running away from our finite existence, but about building stuff here that reflects our boundless human potential. This journey lands you in the world of reason, a place where you see your own reflection in the real world. Here, you discover that the way we perceive reality isn't just a figment of our imagination. It actually matches up with how the world genuinely functions. This realization sets the stage for true knowledge that's not just personal opinion or based on someone else's word, but a blend of our thoughts and the world itself. Through reason, we lay the foundation for science, moral insight, and the creative arts by showing that human awareness can tap into objective truth through logical actions. But wait, no matter how rational we become, we're still missing something if we're just individuals out there seeking recognition from others who are doing the same. The real peak of recognition happens when we create institutions and practices that embody mutual respect and rational freedom in real social forms. This is where the spirit comes into play, where acknowledgement and shared self-realization become intertwined with society through family connections, community involvement, political engagement, and cultural development. In essence, recognition is at the heart of Hegel's entire philosophy and how we carve out spaces for mutual respect and collective fulfillment. Part 12. Hegel's philosophical adventure can be pretty tough to wrap your head around unless you dig into his relationship with Immanuel Kant, who was basically the rock star of German philosophy back in the day. Kant set the stage with ideas from the Enlightenment and kicked off the idealist movement that Hegel later became a big part of. Hegel sees himself as the guy who's pushing Kant's revolution forward by dealing with the contradictions and hurdles that keep Kant from truly pinning down systematic knowledge. By diving into what Hegel has to say about Kant, you can start to understand what fuels Hegel's philosophical journey and what makes his idealism so unique. Kant turned the world of philosophy on its head with what's called the Copernican revolution. Instead of thinking our minds need to mirror some outside world, he argued that what we know should fit our understanding. Before Kant, both empiricists and rationalists wrestled with the tough question of how our limited minds could ever really grasp an endless reality. Kant solved this by saying we only know things as they appear to us, shaped by our own methods of understanding. Things like space, time, cause and effect, and substance aren't traits of the objects themselves, but are the essential building blocks of human thought, making all experience possible. This groundbreaking idea allowed Kant to claim we could have true knowledge, but limited to what we can actually perceive. For the natural world, Kant claimed we could have certain knowledge because these objects are formed through the same mental structures we use to think about them. Scientific knowledge is objective, not by copying the external world, but by applying universal categories of thought to our sensations. But on the downside, this leaves the true essence of things in themselves a mystery, creating a split between the world we know and the mysterious realm beyond our comprehension. Hegel appreciates Kant for realizing that knowing is about being active with our thought structures, but he feels Kant didn't follow this idea to its conclusion. The divide Kant made between what we know and what we can't doesn't really solve the problem, it just adds to it. If things in themselves are entirely unknowable, how do we even know they exist, or that they influence our perceptions? This idea of an unreachable reality clashes with Kant's own rules about sticking to what we can actually experience. Hegel argues that Kant sees these categories of understanding as just arbitrary forms we impose, rather than being the core of reality itself. This gap between how we think and what we think about blocks us from truly understanding anything. If categories are just tools for organizing experiences, then knowledge stays subjective and can't claim to be truly objective. Kant preserves what we perceive and ditches the unknown, leaving both sides incomplete and lopsided. Hegel's answer is to reject the whole notion of a mysterious thing in itself and state that reality is conceptually based. The categories aren't just filters we use, but the real logical framework that shapes reality itself. Thinking and being aren't the same because reality bends to fit our mental processes, but because both follow the same evolving logic. This lets Hegel keep Kant's idea of knowledge being active, without the contradictions trapping Kantian philosophy. Even in ethics, Kant runs into similar troubles despite being spot on about moral duties. His idea of the categorical imperative nails the formal structure of moral thinking by demanding universal rules that respect everyone's rational freedom. Kant was really into the whole idea that morals should apply to everyone, but this left his moral teachings without specific instructions on what exactly we should do or how we ought to arrange society. His famous concept, the categorical imperative, basically tells us, don't contradict yourself and treat people like they matter for their own sake, not as tools. But the problem is, it doesn't really spell out clear duties or provide a roadmap for how society and politics should be set up. Kant was all about big, sweeping rules that don't always help when you're trying to figure out what to do in tricky real-life situations. Plus, Kant made a sharp distinction between what we should do and what we actually want to do, as if living a moral life means constantly fighting against our own desires. But this view misses the point that growing morally isn't just about crushing our wants. It's about changing them. Living ethically should be about mixing reason with feelings, making sure what we feel aligns with what we're supposed to do, rather than having them constantly clash. While Kant kind of hinted at this idea, his focus on universal rules and abstract thinking couldn't quite hit the mark. That's where Hegel stepped in, aiming to build on Kant's thoughts, but with a more detailed approach that addressed these gaps. To Hegel, comprehending concepts wasn't merely about giving our own meanings to things outside us. It was more about seeing them as steps in a logical journey. He believed moral ideas should come alive within actual social structures, going beyond just big general principles. Hegel thought we could solve the conflict between our natural instincts and our free, rational sides by viewing spiritual freedom as just another stage in natural growth. Even though Hegel critiqued Kant, he totally acknowledged Kant's groundbreaking efforts. Things like the creativity of our thinking, our independence in moral choices, and the structured nature of philosophical understanding were all foundational for Hegel's philosophical journey. Kant's insights kind of paved the way for idealism by showing that understanding reality has to be based on rational mental frameworks, not just on what we physically observe. So, Hegel saw himself not as tossing out Kant's ideas, but rather as taking them to their logical conclusions. Section 13. The Struggle of Separation. When you dive into Hegel's thoughts on consciousness, one of the most emotionally powerful ideas you'll find is the concept of the unhappy consciousness. This kicks in when someone feels disconnected from their true self, like they're at odds with who they really are. It's a crucial moment in our journey of self-discovery, and it's something a lot of people can identify with. This emotional struggle arises when you can't get the validation you're seeking from the world around you, so you start searching within for something greater, something infinite that always seems just out of grasp. This sets off a kind of religious mindset, where we humans and the divine don't quite blend together. They're like oil and water. This feeling of being an unhappy consciousness often appears when the old ethical ways of living start to crumble. Consider the ancient Greek lifestyle, where there was a nice harmony between individuals and their community. When society stops providing the recognition people need, they're left to find value in their own private spaces instead of out in the open. But here's the twist. Just focusing on yourself doesn't cut it, because we need others to see and acknowledge us. So people start seeking acceptance from something or someone beyond the limits of our everyday world. This often involves attributing immense importance to a realm beyond our earthly existence. People find themselves living a finite life full of messiness and changes, yet acutely aware of an infinite, seemingly perfect existence out there somewhere. The usual elements of life, like a body that ages, emotions that fluctuate, thoughts that are never quite solid, or achievements that feel temporary, seem insufficient when you stack them against this ideal. This back and forth creates a relentless cycle where you deny what's in front of you for the sake of something bigger. It's like chasing a mirage, constantly trying to leap above your own limitations. Historically, you can spot this in medieval Christianity. But Hegel's ideas really apply to any mentality divided between the finite and the infinite. In Christianity, God's portrayed as all-loving and perfect, which makes human life, finite and flawed, appear even more subpar. The divide between what's perfect and what's real becomes what Hegel calls the painful feeling of separation. Here, instead of being your stepping stone to the divine, your very existence feels like an obstacle. So, people try closing this gap through strict religious practices, fasting, celibacy, self-denial, and withdrawing from regular social life. These practices are aimed at shedding earthly ties, setting the stage for a divine encounter. But ironically, every effort to rise above human limits only accentuates the gap they want to bridge. Desperate for meaning and connection to something greater, the unhappy consciousness surrenders in service, hoping that giving themselves entirely to divine will can bring unity. These acts might offer fleeting moments of feeling accepted and loved despite flaws. However, these feelings aren't permanent. They depend on emotions rather than a real understanding of how human and divine are connected. Ultimately, this cycle of struggle and partial peace rolls on, constantly chasing that elusive balance between what exists and what we hope could be. A heart with deep devotion swings between moments of feeling God's presence and times feeling His absence, creating even more inner conflict than straightforward doubt. The problem with this unhappy consciousness is that it sees the infinite as something out there, separate from daily life, instead of understanding that the infinite is the essential truth within our finite existence. This mindset shifts all positive value to a realm beyond our world and regards real human life as negative, something to move past rather than embrace. This view keeps us from recognizing that our longing for the infinite is actually evidence that the infinite lives within our finite world. When you think about it, we're pretty amazing creatures. Even with our limited point of view, we can still dream big and reach for the stars. That shows that the idea of the infinite is more than just something out there. It's actually a deep part of who we are. Hegel, the philosopher, says that this feeling of being dissatisfied, this unhappy consciousness, is key for us to grow. But ultimately, it isn't the whole story when it comes to understanding ourselves. This feeling helps us see the limits of just accepting what's right in front of us, and challenges us to think more deeply about life's bigger questions. It keeps us from getting too comfy with society's often shallow expectations. We need to go through this phase of feeling a bit lost or unhappy to wake up to who we really are and reach true spiritual maturity. However, there comes a time when this restless feeling has to understand that chasing after some kind of infinite recognition isn't about escaping this world. Instead, this limitless thing we're looking for is right here, embedded in how we connect with others and what we achieve as long as we look at them the right way. This realization turns our unhappy sense of self into something more reasonable, showing us that we don't need to look outside for validation. Our sense of who we are can be found in the world around us. Getting beyond this sense of unhappy consciousness is a big stepping stone in our spiritual journey. It's the moment we grasp that our limited lives can actually be the launch pad for endless possibilities, not just roadblocks. These days, this unhappy consciousness flares up whenever there's a gap between how we live and the way we wish we lived. It doesn't only have to do with religion. It also shows up when people chase after perfect love stories, join political movements for fast change, or dive into philosophies that dismiss life as merely an illusion. Taking a closer look at Hegel's ideas about this unhappy consciousness gives us a fresh angle to understand modern feelings of being out of place, and helps us find better ways to juggle reality and dreams, the finite and the infinite. Part 14 takes us on an intriguing journey into the realm of needs and work. Hegel really nailed it when he delved into civil society, anticipating future shifts and turns in social and political thought. He's all about that space where economic exchanges and voluntary organizations pop up between family life and the big old state. In today's speak, that's market economies, jobs, social classes, and all those setups letting people chase their individual paths while staying connected to the wider world. Hegel was way ahead of the curve. He basically set the stage for ideas Karl Marx would later explore about capitalism. But unlike Marx, Hegel kept it balanced by showing both the perks and pitfalls of our modern economic scene. To get a grip on Hegel's thoughts about how personal liberty fits with social cohesion, civil society is the concept to crack first. Civil society springs to life when people step out of their cozy family circles and start fighting for their own aspirations, mingling with folks they don't have natural bonds with. This marks a big leap in human freedom, allowing individuals to sharpen their own skills and chase dreams, rather than sticking to those tried-and-true family roles. Here, people mainly interact as producers and consumers, employers and employees, buyers and sellers, rather than conforming to family-based roles. This change opens up huge possibilities for personal growth in alliances made by choice, not by birth or some ruling body's say-so. But there's a catch. While it encourages freedom, civil society also brings along its share of hurdles. Following personal desires without considering the bigger picture can result in situations where nobody really wins, sometimes squashing individual success. The hustle of economic rivalry can lead to exploitation, broaden the wealth gap, and make society feel like it's on shaky ground. Plus, the relentless chase for profit can often trample what's beneficial for both people and the planet. This creates a paradox, or what Hegel dubs the dialectical character, where pursuing personal freedom can end up curbing it. Hegel divides civil society into three main parts: needs, the justice system, and the relationship between the police and corporations. The needs system is all about the economic hustle to meet material necessities, depending on each other's diverse skills and assets. It includes everything: production, distribution, consumption, and exchange, the heartbeat of complex societies. The justice system lays down fair play rules, protecting rights and ensuring personal ambitions don't overshadow teamwork. Meanwhile, the police and corporations tackle social issues emerging from businesses, striving to ensure civil society boosts human welfare rather than tearing it down. The needs system is a mixed blessing. On one side, the division of labor and voluntary trade can bring together various skills and passions, achieving more good for everyone than when individuals go it alone. A bustling market can create and distribute wealth in ways that's hard to match with strict planning or old-school communal sharing. Market ties salute personal choice, allowing people to pick jobs, friends, and lifestyles rather than having these imposed by some old-fashioned authority or political order. But beware, the same system breeds inequality and insecurity that can threaten its own foundation. Some folks strike it rich, while others struggle, often not because of effort or talent, but due to uncontrollable factors like market shifts, new tech, or even their birth circumstances. These wealth gaps can snowball since having cash opens doors to quality education, networks, and juicy investment opportunities that folks without funds just can't grab. The economy is like a roller coaster. It goes through phases where sometimes too much is being produced, other times not enough people are buying, or risky financial choices lead to communities falling apart. This results in many eager-to-work people stuck at home because jobs just aren't available. Hegel points out that being virtuous or leaving it all to the market won't cut it. We need systems that tweak the economic mechanisms. The justice system gives us rules to protect ownership, ensure commitments are honored, and address cheating or stealing. But these laws alone can't fix the broader messiness that comes with economic inequality and instability. That's where what Hegel calls the police steps in, not just law enforcement, but a range of public policies that aim to guide the economy for the good of everyone. This concept of police power covers things like regulating businesses, providing social safety nets, making sure everyone has access to education, and protecting the environment. It's about ensuring private interests don't overshadow the public good. Then there are corporations, but not like today's businesses. Hegel imagined them as groups of people in similar professions banding together, almost like guilds or trade associations. These aren't just firms. They're communities of professionals supporting one another. These groups give folks a sense of belonging that goes beyond family ties, without requiring them to dive full-on into politics. Hegel's exploration of civil society highlights why just relying on market interactions isn't enough for true human flourishing. Even when the economy is humming along nicely, markets tend to treat people as tools for a purpose, not as individuals deserving of respect. True community and recognition can't be found in economics alone. Civil society pushes us to look at the state for that universal recognition while preserving the personal freedom and diversity that civil society thrives on. Part 15. No intellectual has had quite the impact on social and political theories as Karl Marx. The back and forth between his historical materialism and Hegel's idealist dialectic is one of those deep philosophical discussions that's been a hot topic for ages. Marx essentially took Hegel's concepts and flipped them on their head. While Hegel focused on the evolution of ideas, Marx argued that it's really the development of material conditions that fuels historical change. Even so, Marx acknowledged that he drew heavily from Hegel, picking out the practical bits from what he termed the mystical elements of Hegel's thoughts. Understanding how Marx borrowed from Hegel is crucial to fully grasping the weight of Hegel's contributions and seeing how Marx's materialism was born from them. Marx's intellectual journey kicked off with a deep dive into Hegel's views on politics and history, especially focusing on themes like alienation and the quest for recognition. As a young thinker, Marx shared Hegel's belief in the human drive to creatively reshape the world. But he took issue with Hegel's infatuation with philosophy, arguing that he neglected the real-world conditions propelling human advancement. For Marx, people's primary goal is to fulfill their material needs through labor before they can pursue grand cultural aspirations. This pivot from ideas to the tangible world led Marx to reshape Hegelian principles while still keeping their structured logic intact. Consider Marx's notion of alienated labor. It's akin to Hegel's master-slave metaphor, but emphasizes the economic backdrop instead of purely conceptual stuff. In capitalism, laborers find themselves disconnected from their work, the production process, their essence, and their peers. This isn't just a theoretical issue, it's all about practical realities like ownership and how labor is divided. Workers end up like Hegel's slave, creating value yet feeling helpless. Marx criticized Hegel's perspective as being overly philosophical for attributing alienation to consciousness rather than material circumstances. For Hegel, freedom emerged when the slave realized their work impacted the world. Conversely, Marx maintained that acknowledging this alone wouldn't alter the tangible reality of oppression. Genuine liberation means not just altering perceptions, but transforming the very fabric of production. This insight drove Marx's belief in the necessity of revolutionary change as a path to human freedom. Marx retained the skeleton of Hegel's historical dialectic, but shifted its spotlight from the evolution of ideas to the transformation of productive capacities. He saw history as propelled by conflicts between production forces and production relations. In essence, between the means of generating wealth and how authority over production is shared. Whenever these forces grow too vast for the existing societal structures, revolution erupts, birthing new systems that accommodate enhanced productivity. This dialectical motion, according to Marx, is what steered humanity from primitive societies through slavery, feudalism, and into capitalism, with a trajectory toward socialism and communism. Analyzing capitalism, Marx used Hegel's tactics to point out internal contradictions that he believed would eventually lead to capitalism's collapse. By drawing workers into sprawling factories, capitalism inadvertently fosters a sense of unity and shared purpose among them. The relentless profit chase spurs technological progress that boosts efficiency, but also results in job losses and plummeting profit margins, triggering economic crises that reveal the absurdity of prioritizing profit over human needs. Ultimately, capitalism breeds a working class with nothing to lose but their shackles and everything to gain from overhauling the societal structure. However, Marx doesn't simply follow Hegel's footsteps. He critiques his idealism too. Marx argues that Hegel's idea of the absolute spirit is essentially just a reflection of existing societal relationships, not their ultimate truth, and deceives people into accepting injustice by making it appear logically necessary. Hegelian philosophy, according to Marx, benefits those in power, providing intellectual support for the present order and stifling genuine attempts to instigate change. Philosophers often describe the owl of Minerva as taking flight at nighttime, suggesting that philosophy tends to understand big changes only after they've already happened. Marx wasn't too thrilled with how Hegel preferred sticking to lofty ideas overlooking real-life scenarios and conditions. Hegel's way of reasoning, known as the dialectic, relies on books and thoughts to deal with contradictions, mixing ideas around rather than taking tangible steps in the real world. This approach can too quickly declare a resolution where issues are sorted out in theory but not really fixed in practice. Marx argued that real dialectical methods need active efforts to alter social relationships, not just comprehend them mentally. It's about moving from interpreting to actively changing the world, pushing thinkers to go beyond mere philosophical thoughts to real political action. Despite his critiques, Marx held on to some of Hegel's concepts and methods throughout his serious studies on economics. In his work, Capital, Marx showcases how capitalism reflects Hegel's pattern of conflict and resolution, though on a real-world scale rather than just a theoretical one. He examines how people treat commodities as possessing more importance than they actually have, linking back to Hegel's view on how consciousness often mistakes its own creations as independent entities. Marx dreamed of a revolutionary change that would do away with alienation and pave the way for true human fulfillment, mirroring Hegel's ideas about recognition and freedom, but staying grounded in physical realities. The conversation between Hegel and Marx continues to influence today's social theory and activism. Modern social movements, thinkers, and radical philosophers still draw from Hegelian and Marxist theories when analyzing how both cultural and material factors influence social change. Understanding this connection is crucial for grasping the role of dialectical thinking in addressing today's societal problems and imagining new ways to structure institutions. Part 16. Let's jump into Hegel's intriguing perspective on art and its place in the grand scheme of things. According to Hegel, the highest form of art is actually a relic of the past. Now, this doesn't suggest that we'll stop creating or enjoying art, but rather, art has lost its status as the ultimate way to convey our deepest insights about reality and human life. Today, religion and philosophy have become the main avenues for cultural expression, leaving art a bit uncertain about its direction and purpose. To really get why Hegel thought this, you need to understand his view on how art has developed over time and its connection to the growth of human consciousness and culture. Hegel didn't see art as just something nice to look at or a way to entertain. To him, true art was all about unveiling the truth. It's about bringing spiritual notions to life through physical forms, revealing profound truths about humanity. When we engage with great art, it's not just about appreciating beauty. It's about capturing the essence of human existence. In Hegel's eyes, the pinnacle of art involves what he calls the sensuous appearance of the idea, meaning that it communicates endless spiritual content through finite physical mediums. This truth-revealing aspect is what sets true art apart from mere craftsmanship, entertainment, or aesthetic pleasure, although these elements still play a role in creation. Hegel broke down art's evolution into three major phases, each illustrating a unique connection between spirit and form. First up is symbolic art. Think Egyptian pyramids or massive sculptures. These try to express something infinite that no visible form can completely capture. They evoke a sense of mystery and grandeur, but fall short of fully conveying their deeper meanings. Symbolic art hints at ideas that go beyond physical depiction, creating a tension between what you see and the underlying message. Next, we have classical art, which finds its glory in Greek sculptures. Here, spirit and form are in perfect sync. Greek statues of gods and heroes embody ideal human beauty while perfectly encapsulating their spiritual essence. Classical art achieves what symbolic art could only reach for: a seamless union of infinite meaning and finite appearance. Yet, this becomes its limitation, as it can only articulate spiritual ideas that suit beautiful forms, overlooking deeper spiritual truths. Finally, we encounter romantic art. It sheds the constraints of classical art by realizing that infinite spiritual concepts can't be fully contained in any physical form. Christian art, medieval architecture, and modern poetry dig into this depth by pointing out the inadequacy of externalizing internal essences. Romantic art delves deeper spiritually by exploring inner life, moral struggles, emotional richness, and the dance between the finite and infinite. But with this deeper dive comes a reduction in sheer beauty and formality. As art becomes more spiritually nuanced, it moves away from pure aesthetics, leaning more towards religion and philosophy. Romantic art's evolution ushers in what Hegel dubbed the dissolution of art, where art becomes more introspective, reflecting on itself rather than conveying ultimate truths. Modern art tends to play with form, make ironic points, and question its origins instead of focusing solely on spiritual exposition. Today's artists are more conscious of their craft's history and boundaries. As such, their creations often engage with past artistic traditions, rather than purely tapping into the essence of contemporary times. This self-awareness fosters sophisticated artistic creations, but it also underscores how art has diverged from its primary mission of revealing deep truths. The notion that art has reached a point where it can't develop further doesn't imply an end to creativity, or that modern art lacks value. It simply suggests that art isn't the primary means for cultural insight anymore. In ancient societies, art was the chief way of showcasing and perpetuating core beliefs about the world, human nature, and life's purpose. Classic works like Greek tragedies, medieval cathedrals, and Renaissance paintings did what today's philosophy, science, and religion undertake. These days, we've split up the search for truth, beauty, and goodness into different areas instead of bundling them all into one artistic quest. This split allows us to excel more in each area individually, but it also creates cultural gaps and a feeling of being disconnected from the whole picture. Science says it's all about truth. Moral philosophy sticks to what's right, and art focuses on beauty, which might make it hard for folks to blend these areas into a meaningful way of living. Art isn't the unifying force it used to be, which some believe is part of why people today find it hard to discover a deep meaning in life, as everything's become so specialized and divided. Hegel had a good sense of where things were heading, with how beauty, science, and morality bump into each other. His idea of art coming to an end suggests there's hope for a new chapter in human culture. As art gives way from being the cultural center, it opens up space for other expressions that don't need to tackle deep truths, but instead can explore the rich tapestry of human life. Conversations today about art's role in democratic societies and how it mixes with politics, along with what cultural institutions should represent, are still dealing with stuff Hegel talked about. Even if some folks might not buy into his historical take on art, his views are still useful for looking at how art, culture, and society work together and change. Part 17. Hegel's perspective on aesthetics is a deep dive, one of the most comprehensive in philosophy, tackling what makes art beautiful and its connection to truth, morality, and spiritual growth. While some folks might think of art as a personal expression or just a nice add-on to life's practical concerns, Hegel insists that art gives us genuine insights into reality with our senses rather than just through intellectual concepts. So, when we're moved by beautiful things, it's not just for fun. They actually open up a peek into the essence of existence, nourishing our perception and emotions in ways that pure reasoning can't quite manage. What's fascinating about Hegel's approach is how he connects these thoughts with detailed analyses of different art forms, all while tying them back to his broader philosophical principles. He fundamentally believes beauty is like the visual presentation of an idea, meaning art is where abstract ideas and spiritual truths become visible and easy for us to experience directly. Real beauty in art isn't just about color, sound, and shape playing well together, although they do play a role. The crux is how these material forms bring deep spiritual meanings to life. When universal truths find expression in specific forms, when infinite ideas come into view for our limited perceptions, achieving this involves not just artistic skill, but a profound grasp of the spiritual messages conveyed by the art. Hegel's detailed approach to aesthetics delves into both the general nature of aesthetic experience and the specifics of various art forms. His broader view considers what beauty really means, how art creation fits into the grand scheme of things, and how to balance viewing things aesthetically with practical or theoretical perspectives. He then zooms in on specifics, exploring architecture, sculpture, painting, music, and poetry, showing how each medium has its own materials, techniques, and modes of expression. Each art form has its historical context and connection to the culture from which it arises and reaches its peak. Take architecture, for example. It's viewed as the most grounded and least spiritual art because it mainly deals with space, mass, and weight, rather than more subtle sensory forms. Yet its tangibility lets it communicate aspects of spiritual existence that other arts might not, especially in how humanity interacts with nature and history. Consider Egyptian pyramids. They embody the weighty solemnity of death and an everlasting reach, achieved through enormity and precise geometry. Greek temples, meanwhile, embody harmony between humans and the divine, with their proportionate forms seamlessly blending into their surroundings. Gothic cathedrals, however, reach skyward striving for transcendence, turning stone into illuminated spaces filled with lightness. Sculpture provides a more direct touch with spiritual content as it can represent living beings, not just spaces to inhabit. Greek sculpture epitomizes this art form's height, combining spiritual essence with sensory appeal through idealized human forms. The Greek gods, portrayed as magnificently human, capture divine perfection while retaining an approachable presence. However, sculpture hits a boundary because it shows only the exterior. It can't quite convey the swirling interplay of thoughts, feelings, and deeper spiritual experiences. Painting moves past sculpture's boundaries by capturing both outer form and inner life, using color, light, and composition to suggest mental states and spiritual narratives. Christian paintings shine brightest when depicting the divine human bond through scenes of incarnation, redemption, and spiritual evolution. Masters from the Renaissance, like Raphael and Leonardo, masterfully render spiritual themes with unparalleled nuance, while keeping their works visually captivating and immediately engaging. Yet, painting is limited to visual expression and doesn't allow the temporal progression that best reflects spiritual ideas. On the flip side, music transcends these visual limitations by unfolding over time, representing the flow of inner emotion and spiritual development as they progress, not confined to a fixed point. Music stands out because it captures emotions and spiritual journeys rather than just depicting the physical world or fixed states of mind. This art form directly taps into our personal experiences by creating patterns that mirror our inner life's rhythms without needing concrete images or representations. However, this freedom from depicting specific things is also music's limitation, as it can't offer the specific content that other more precise spiritual expressions can. Poetry fills this gap by blending the timing of music with clear and concrete content, thanks to language. With poetry, we can convey the whole spectrum of human experiences while maintaining the sensory immediacy that distinguishes art from just ideas. Epic poetry narrates stories of external events with their deeper spiritual meanings. Lyric poetry explores personal emotions and their development, while dramatic poetry illustrates the impactful clash between personal goals and external realities. But because poetry relies heavily on language, it edges into conceptual thinking territory, hinting at a shift from purely aesthetic enjoyment to a deeper philosophical comprehension. Hegel's exploration of various art forms shows both their unique achievements and how they interconnect within the broader narrative of humanity's cultural journey. Each art style offers a special way to convey beauty and meaning, yet each also highlights its limits, pointing toward more effective ways to express spiritual ideas. The history of art mirrors this progression in Hegel's larger philosophy, moving from straightforward material expression to more complex spiritual themes, eventually leading to an understanding that surpasses mere aesthetics. This journey isn't about abandoning past gains. It's about weaving them into richer cultural expressions. Modern aesthetic thinkers continue wrestling with many of the issues Hegel's detailed framework brings to light, such as the balance between form and content, the relationship between aesthetic attraction and intellectual worth, and art's role in democratic contexts. Even if you don't fully embrace Hegel's specific views on how art evolved, his systematic approach offers valuable insights into understanding how our sensory experiences of art, cultural significance, and spiritual growth intertwine. Part 18. One of Hegel's biggest and lasting concepts around being human is alienation. To truly get what he means, you need to see it as part of his view on how consciousness and society evolve over time. Alienation isn't just about being unhappy or pointing fingers at unfair systems. It's a key stepping stone in understanding ourselves and recognizing our freedom. By going through alienation, we realize that shallow connections aren't cutting it, which pushes us to find deeper ways to be acknowledged and understand our true identity. Digging into Hegel's idea of alienation reveals it's got two sides. It's tough, but also a big part of personal growth. It kicks in when the things we've made start to feel foreign and restrictive instead of freeing. This can pop up anywhere, in how we interact with nature, how society ticks, the culture we build, or even in our own heads. The common thread with all types of alienation is the feeling of being out of place, where human-made things seem independent, even working against us. Those who are alienated feel like they're at the mercy of forces they can't control, despite these forces being human creations that we actually could manage with effort. The most straightforward alienation is between our consciousness and the world, where we see stuff as merely existing instead of shaped by our thoughts. Everyday thinking tends to treat the world like it's utterly detached from our minds, forgetting that we play a role in creating reality. This results in a naive outlook where we think we're just spectators in a world seemingly untouched by humans. In this mindset, people often miss the inner ability they have to shape their world and lose out on a deeper understanding of themselves and their environment. Social alienation occurs when our systems and traditions seem like external forces instead of avenues to mutual freedom. Institutions like law, the economy, politics, and culture might appear to be obstacles rather than ways to reach shared understanding and personal fulfillment. This is particularly noticeable today, where complex systems obscure their dependence on our participation and approval. Often, people feel like they're being dominated by impersonal forces, markets, bureaucracy, technology, operating as if they're beyond our control. Talking about religion, alienation is significant because it casts our human traits and aspirations as belonging to powerful, divine forces. Religious belief often attributes endless qualities like power, wisdom, and goodness to these beings, while viewing humans as inherently weak and flawed. Hegel identifies this as the unhappy consciousness, noting the disconnect between recognizing boundless value while dealing with human limitations. Although religious alienation keeps the dream of unlimited human potential alive, it makes it seem like it's not something we inherently possess. Cultural alienation comes up when our cultural achievements feel more like old trophies instead of living proof of our ongoing creativity. With today's rapid shifts, old traditions can seem irrelevant, while new cultural forms struggle to get a foothold. People might feel distant from their traditions without having developed ways to meaningfully engage with fresh culture. Educational settings like schools and universities can add to this feeling by treating cultural works as objects to simply absorb, failing to encourage active cultural participation. Philosophical alienation occurs when thinking becomes irrelevant to real-life experiences, spinning abstract ideas that don't connect to actual human issues. This can show up in various forms, like theories that see reality as mere concepts or methods that reduce human experience to just instincts and senses. We only truly overcome this type of alienation when our thinking reconnects with real human life. This requires a philosophy that is both thoughtfully examined and deeply engaged with human existence, capable of being precise with ideas while staying grounded in the experiences that spark philosophical questions to begin with. According to Hegel, feeling alienated isn't necessarily a negative thing. In fact, it plays a key part in how we grow as individuals. We can't just sidestep it or fix it in a quick fix. Alienation makes us notice the weak spots in our relationships and encourages us to understand ourselves better and think about creating improved societal systems without going through a disconnect from family, community, our culture, and early societal roles. We wouldn't develop the critical perspective needed for true moral reflection and the freedom to make our own choices. Similarly, unless societies feel alienated from their current systems, they're unlikely to demand reforms and political change. Solving the issue of alienation isn't about going back to how we were before we felt separated. It's about what Hegel calls mediated immediacy. This concept means integrating the good parts of a distanced perspective while leaving behind the negatives. It involves shaping systems where individuals see themselves as part of their social surroundings and meet the complexities of modern life. The goal isn't to erase every difference and divide, but to form connections that enhance human freedom rather than stifle it. Therefore, moving past alienation is more of an ongoing journey than a definite endpoint. In today's fields of psychology, sociology, political theory, and cultural criticism, Hegel's ideas on alienation are still influential. They're expanded to deal with new scenarios and issues. Exploring Hegel's in-depth analysis of alienation can provide useful insights to help us grasp modern-day separations and think about creating richer human relationships and social structures. Part 19. Hegel's main gig was to make philosophy truly reflect the twisty, ever-shifting world around us. Instead of just slapping a universal method onto reality, he thought philosophy should draw its approach directly from the very stuff it's examining. For Hegel, thinking about philosophy can't just be divorced from the actual process of living. It's intrinsically part of it. He called this deep dive into how we think speculative thinking, a conversation that's not only about explaining the world, but also about shaping it. Most traditional philosophical techniques tend to split the thinker from the thing being thought about, struggling to tie together our personal stances with reality. Approaches centered on experience as the ground of knowledge can trip up when trying to leap from personal sensory experiences to vast universal truths. Meanwhile, methods that lean heavily on reasoning sometimes flounder when it comes to articulating how rational ideas mesh with the chaotic, unpredictable nature outside us. Kant tried to untangle these knots by focusing on what makes experience even feasible, but that just led to new puzzles regarding how our perceptions stack up against a reality existing apart from them. But Hegel had a different view. For him, thinking and being weren't two separate things that needed bridging. They were parts of the same unfolding journey. In his eyes, reality didn't fit a rational mold because we imposed that order. It was rational on its own terms, growing and understanding itself through our rational processes. So, he reckoned that philosophical method and content couldn't be peeled apart, since rational thinking is the heart of philosophical inquiry. Real philosophy wasn't just logic or psychology, it was about the deep, underlying structure of reality itself. Speculative thinking, according to Hegel, wasn't about chucking out wrong ideas in a huff. Instead, it insisted that even the weirdest beliefs had nuggets of truth in them, worth preserving and refining. Missteps were just stepping stones to better understanding, with each phase sprouting from the contradictions of the old and blossoming into fresh insights. Rather than a straight line, philosophical growth is like a spiral, always circling back to the start with newly minted understanding. Each idea or category is packed with its own tensions that drive thinking to evolve and refine, tracing back to its roots for deeper nourishment. In the grand scheme of Hegelian philosophy, no idea floats in a vacuum. Its strength lies in its ties to a wider web of knowledge. You can't pin down a concept without scooping up its part in the bigger philosophical puzzle. The truth of any idea depends not on outside measures or its seeming clarity, but on its place within the sprawling landscape of human understanding. When diving into philosophy, it's all about the systematic approach, urging you not to dip in and out of ideas or principles without sizing up their connections. Now, Hegel's version of system building doesn't box things up with some external logic. It's more organic, growing from within. Concepts carry their own internal contradictions and shifts, paving their own path by wrestling with and resolving their tensions. This leads to sharper ideas. So, real philosophical thinking requires patience, allowing thoughts to mature on their own timeline instead of cramming them into tidy packages or rushing to wrap things up in a way that suits your fancy. When it comes to Hegel's way of thinking, it's like he needs a special kind of language to show the messy, changing dance of how ideas grow and clash. Regular day-to-day words and traditional logic just don't cut it. They're too fixed, too straight up, while Hegel's ideas are much more fluid and always in motion. So, when you dive into Hegel talk, it's all about grabbing onto how things are the same and different, how opposites can come together, and how ideas kind of push themselves onwards without tripping over contradictions or getting lost in vague, mystical stuff. This tricky language game is a big part of what makes Hegel's words such a tough nut to crack. The real goodies you get from this way of thinking are wrapped up in the journey you take to get there, because the process is actually where the philosophical magic happens. Thinking like this isn't about memorizing facts, it's more about sharpening your skills and breaking down ideas and understanding how they fit into the bigger picture. Hegel's philosophy is really about growing and changing, rather than just stuffing your head with facts about the way things are. The goal is to jump into this back and forth of rational thinking where reality sort of gets to know itself better. Even today, a lot of thinkers are wrestling with the same headaches that Hegel's method dives into, like how you tie method with content, the chaos of building a philosophical system, and where contradiction plugs into rational thinking. Whether you're on board with Hegel's particular spin on these ideas or not, his well-organized approach throws some neat insights your way about what gets philosophical reflection buzzing and how it ties in with other kinds of logical thinking. Part 20. 2 centuries after Hegel left this world, his thoughts still leave a mark on how we interpret and interact with our surroundings in ways that people back in his era could never have predicted. His ideas got picked up adjusted, and even dismantled by an astonishing range of thinkers, from communists and existentialists to mind philosophers, feminists, post-colonial experts, and brain researchers. This wide-ranging impact shines a light not only on the vastness of Hegel's original brainchild, but also on how pertinent the topics he dove into are today, offering insights on tackling current issues. Understanding Hegel's lasting influence involves recognizing how his ideas continue to be directly transmitted and how they've been repurposed by others. A clear instance of Hegel's impact is seen through Karl Marx. The socialist and communist ideologies sprouting from Marx's notions employed Hegel's dialectical approach, but opted to focus on practical material conditions rather than on the realm of pure thought. In the last century, revolutionary movements in places like Russia, China, and Cuba leaned heavily on Marxist theories that showcased Hegelian themes, such as conflict, alienation, and pushing towards greater human freedom. Even as these movements evolved away from Hegel's or Marx's initial theories, they still relied on analytical methods shaped by his dialectical method. Existentialism offers a complicated link with Hegel's viewpoints. It both draws from and contests his systematic approach. Søren Kierkegaard, often pinpointed as the first existential thinker, built his philosophical angle in direct opposition to what he saw as the overly abstract and falsely harmonious view of Hegel's philosophy. Yet, Kierkegaard's attention to individual truth existing as opposed to mere essence and passionate devotion over mere contemplation can be viewed as extensions of certain Hegelian ideas about the genuine essence of spiritual life. Existential pioneers in the 20th century, like Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir, mined Hegelian notions about consciousness, self-awareness, and freedom while steering towards more narrative and experiential methodologies, leaving systematic ones behind. In psychoanalysis, Hegel's thoughts find resonance through figures like Jacques Lacan. He harnessed Hegelian ideas to revamp Freud's theories of the unconscious. Lacan's interpretation of the master-slave dialectic as crucial to psychological growth left a lasting impression among analysts. Ideas on acknowledgement, alienation, and the role of language in shaping thought form core elements in contemporary psychoanalytic approaches to understanding personal development, relationships, and cultural engagement. Even those who veer away from Lacan often use frameworks rooted in Hegelian philosophy. Within feminist discourse, Hegel's theories are both critiqued and reshaped to explain gender dynamics and the struggle for women's rights. Simone de Beauvoir's thesis on women as the second sex leans heavily on Hegel's ideas of recognition and otherness. Scholars like Susan Buck-Morse suggest that events like the Haitian Revolution might have influenced Hegel's ideas about dominance and submission. Current feminist thinkers find Hegelian concepts handy in studying patriarchal systems, although they also critique his male-centric biases and lackluster exploration of gender differences. This exploration highlights Hegel's influence in modern social and political theory frameworks. In post-colonial theory, Hegelian inspiration remains robust, even amidst critiques of its Eurocentric view of history. Frantz Fanon, in his work Black Skin, White Masks, employs Hegel's master-slave idea to examine the psychological impacts of colonialism and resistance. Modern post-colonial scholars see value in Hegelian ideas, but also flag his oversight in acknowledging cultural diversity and specific historical contexts. This exchange points to both the relevance and the limitations of Hegel's ideas in grappling with contemporary global issues. In the world of analytic philosophy, which took a different path from the ideas of German idealism, there's been a growing interest in themes reminiscent of Hegel. Philosophers like John McDowell, Robert Brandom, and Terry Pinkert argue that Hegelian ideas, like how the mind links with the world, how rational thinking is influenced by social interactions, and how concepts change over time, are valuable for addressing modern questions in areas such as mind philosophy, knowledge theory, and ethics. This newfound interest suggests that the divide between continental and analytic philosophy might not be as significant as previously believed. Philosophers today are realizing that Hegel's systematic approach can be quite compatible with the latest developments in logic, cognitive science, and the philosophy of language. Hegelian themes are even showing up in fields like neuroscience and cognitive science, particularly when studying things like consciousness, self-awareness, and social cognition. Research exploring the role of the brain in self-awareness suggests that understanding oneself often stems from social interactions and depends on seeing oneself from others' perspectives. This supports Hegel's view that self-awareness is shaped by social connections and recognition's role in our psychological development. Even though scientists usually don't delve deep into Hegel's philosophy, their discoveries often echo insights that Hegel reached just through contemplation. The lasting influence of Hegel's philosophy is a testament to its deep insights and its focus on enduring issues like freedom, recognition, alienation, and how individuals connect with their communities. As we tackle challenges like cultural diversity, income inequality, technological shifts, and environmental concerns, Hegel's thoughts provide fertile ground for reflection. His approach to analyzing contradictions and change over time helps clarify complex societal transformations. Instead of segmenting social, political, economic, or cultural issues, Hegel's framework offers a more integrated way of thinking. Nevertheless, there's awareness of the potential pitfalls in Hegel's method, especially its tendency towards imposing false harmony and making premature conclusions. Engaging with Hegel's philosophy today often involves a careful examination that keeps the valuable parts while discarding outdated ideas about history, culture, and the idea of a total system. This kind of engagement highlights the vibrancy of philosophical traditions that are open to reinterpretation instead of being stuck in old dogmas. Hegel's notion that philosophy articulates the spirit of its time suggests that every era should revisit philosophical questions in light of current circumstances. In the end, a philosophical legacy's worth is assessed not by precise forecasts, but by how its concepts and methods aid in addressing ongoing human challenges. By this standard, Hegel's philosophical insights have proven surprisingly useful in helping people address many of today's major societal issues. It remains uncertain, however, whether future generations will continue to find Hegel's methods beneficial. Yet, his ideas' persistence through 200 years of significant historical changes suggests he tapped into something profoundly insightful about human nature and rational thought.